All right, first of all, for anyone who just joined, I see a couple more people just entered. Welcome. Thank you again for coming. I'm really excited to share some of these practices, specifically how to prioritize when everything is important. I understand, this is kind of a complex subject, and it's really one of the biggest, probably, after we talk about the basics of prioritization, it's probably one of the biggest obstacles that we experience because, right, we're trying to look at what's important, but naturally, so much of our life is important, right? And I do understand that if you are taking time to attend this webinar, chances are time is very valuable to you. So I am going to try to make this as valuable as possible. As a quick note, my name is Bella, and I work in the customer success team for Priority Matrix. So in addition to hosting webinars, I also hold demo calls with one-on-one clients where we come up with unique solutions. So if you're ever interested in that, please don't hesitate to shout out. As a quick note, we will have a Q&A session at the end. Feel free to dump your questions in right now. You don't have to wait. You can just pop them in now, and at the end we will get to as many as we can. All right, so first of all, this idea, how do you prioritize when everything's important? And then, why is everything important? I think that this is probably one of the most critical questions that we have. And sometimes I talk to people and they sound really, really sort of disheartened. And first of all, I just want to clarify, it's not you, it's life. So basically, it's not like you don't understand prioritization. It's not like you simply don't know how to sort of juggle everything. This is just what life throws at you. So I do want to just point that out at the very beginning because, this question I know can bring up a lot of stress because obviously if it's important to you, it is something that you're not going to just want to just chuck, right? And that's absolutely not what this webinar is going to be about. So, I really hope that this webinar is going to show you how you can prioritize despite the fact that probably there are more important responsibilities in your life than anyone probably has the capacity to address. So next, I actually want to bring up this quote. When everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And so many people have sort of taken this, run with it. I know that there are a couple different famous people right now that are attributed as being the originator of this quote, but I'm just going to give this one reporter from 1973 the credit for that, as it is the first time that we have seen it in print. We saw it in print in history. So just a little fun fact, but it is true. There's a reason why everybody says it and everybody thinks somebody else invented it, right? Because it's so true that it just immediately resonates with us. So when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And that's absolutely true. And that's sort of one of the basic tenets of prioritization, right? But that does not mean that when, there's a problem with everything being important, right? There's a difference between priority and there's a difference and important, right? Importance is a label that relates to exactly how you see it in relation to your life, your hopes, your future, right? You are allowed to put that label on as many things as you want. It is not my job to tell you what is or is not important. Priority, however, is my area. Priority relates to the degree of importance, right? The nature of numbers requires that there can only be, only one can be first, right? So when we think of, a long line, only one thing can be first, right? There has to be something that comes first. If it's not coming first, then there's something else that's actually first, right? So basically, you can put the label important on anything you want. My job is to help you see how within that pool of important items, you can still find clarity, you can still prioritize. So it's definitely true. When everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. Absolutely, you need to prioritize. Without the idea of there being a priority, it's a moot point, right? But I would say, in case you're sort of quickly translating this into if everything is important, nothing is important, I think that's actually inaccurate, right? we can have a life, we can live in a world where so many things, almost everything is important. I think that's sort of the nature of life, right? And that doesn't actually diminish the importance of everything if it's all important. But the concept of priority, this is absolutely true. When everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And I think that prioritizing can sometimes feel a little bit sacrilegious, right, when we're looking at all our important things. But the truth is that we fail to truly give ourselves the absolute benefit and the absolute credit for our energy if we don't prioritize. So that's sort of the idea here. So now I want to talk a little bit about why everything is important. And I've found through speaking with many of my different clients that there are a couple reasons why maybe at the moment you are overburdened by the sheer bulk of important responsibilities. Now, of course, again, this is in no way meant to negate your ability to label something as important, but I find that there are particular character types or particular practices that sometimes can maximize the amount of important tasks in relation to what we actually need to spend our energy on. So some of the possible causes, first of all, are that you are a humanitarian. And what I mean by that, and, this is probably, if you are, kudos to you in the sense that I'm sure you can look at things globally, you care about your entire team, etc. But if you're the kind of person that sees everything and sees all the effects and all the ways that this impacts that and all the different metrics that different responsibilities can impact, perhaps you are overburdening yourselves because you are taking on the responsibility of moving the entire team's needle, right? And the important thing, of course, is that everybody is in charge of the metric that they have been assigned. So if we're talking about, metrics, we're talking about those decisions. And in many ways, it's just a very precise way of talking about your responsibility. So for example, I have particular metrics in our team, and they're completely different from other metrics. And it is my responsibility to move that needle, right? I can care about my teammates' metrics and I can care about his or her success. But the most important thing is that we are responsible for those metrics. So technically, we should be worrying first and foremost about the metrics that are our own. So again, if you are that humanitarian, very charismatic and generous person in your team who's always willing to help a teammate out, perhaps when you actually look at your list of responsibilities, you're not being, I'd say, selfish enough when it comes to whether or not this responsibility is actually going to move your metric, give you that, indicate that you have actually moved the needle. So again, I know that, selfishness is never, in a certain sense, it never feels good, it's never the answer, but there's a difference between selfishness and actually being able to put yourself and your metrics first in terms of profession. So I think that this is something that a lot of people can fall into, right? They look at all these responsibilities and they end up maybe, being really energetic and enthusiastic and taking on responsibilities that don't actually move their needle. And when it comes down to it, when we're looking at quarterly, yearly reviews, your most important responsibility to your team is actually, following up and moving the needle in your own metrics. So the answer, of course, is fairly simple, but I think it doesn't hurt to reiterate. You need to ask yourself, how does this move my metric, right? And don't only ask yourself, does this move my metric? Ask how it moves your metric, because that'll give you a greater understanding into the degree of importance, right? And we're going to be talking a little bit about degrees of importance in a quadrant level, but then as we dig deeper and sort of drill down even into each particular quadrant and its degrees of importance. So how does this move my metric? And, it is okay to put yourself first in this area. Again, we love those people in the team who are they care about everyone, but really, probably your metric, your KPI, it's the most important responsibility you have, and make sure that, your attention, even subconscious, subliminal to someone else's metrics or something that's not specifically metrics, but you see as important, is not taking your attention away. Secondly, you're non-confrontational regarding tasks. And what I mean by that, I don't mean in a social, personal way. I mean that when you see that label important, you just sort of stand back. You don't pick it apart. You don't question it, right? It's kind of funny because this probably means that you're a great worker, you've got a great work ethic too. But there's a downside to not, to being so willing to do the work. So for example, when we talk about teams and managers, sometimes they notice that the people who don't want to put in the work are a lot more critical about tasks and importance. They're a little bit better at really sort of critically unpacking the levels of importance, right? Because they don't want to do the work, so they want to find every reason why it should be deprioritized. So I don't at all suggest that you follow, change your work ethic, right? Keep up with that, but at the same time, remember that maybe there are some ways that excellent work ethic and that willingness to put the time, the effort, and the sweat in might be holding you back from being truly critical in a good way of the importance of items. Because it's important to challenge those items, right? You need to compare and contrast them because then you truly understand this is more important than that. Why is this more important than that? And then you can truly feel that calm when you decide that of all your important items, you will actually attend to this one first. If you're sort of too respectful to that label important, you have multiple items with the label important that in your mind, because you won't jump forward, you won't pick at it, you won't maybe sort of rough it up a bit, you won't actually understand where they are in line. So again, being non-confrontational in regards, and I mean mentally, internally non-confrontational. I'm not necessarily suggesting that you should verbally confront the importance of items. You can just, I see it as a practice, a great practice that you can internally reiterate as time goes by. So again, make sure to challenge the importance, right? The concept of devil's advocate, right, can be sort of annoying, but it's really great here too. Be your own devil's advocate sometimes. Be like, why is this important? Why do I have to do this? Because it can be super helpful because you can truly, truly know exactly why you're doing this, and it'll give you a greater sense of clarity and a greater sense of purpose as well. So I think that is a second really important thing. And of course, it is most characteristic in those great hard workers, which, considering that you're focused on productivity and attending this webinar, I'm guessing that probably 99.999% of you have greater than average work ethic. So I just want you to be aware that sometimes, with these great aspects, there also can come these areas that maybe you need to work on and be a little bit more critical of. Second, to actually go hand in hand, you might be using too many red flags. So I've actually found that this happens a lot, right? We get in the habit of applying red flags because, in a certain sense, applying the red flag almost feels like you're beginning to do something. And yes, right, according to the habits of prioritization, applying that red flag is the first step to actually putting out that fire. Mixing metaphors a little bit. But I think the truth is that sometimes we can get in that habit, right? And I am guilty of this as well. And then secondly, maybe you're looking too far ahead. So again, it's great to have foresight, right? But you can stress yourself out a little too much. So it's important to know what's coming ahead, but you don't have to keep it all in your sights at every moment. So my solution to these problems is actually something that I think is subconsciously not what we do. I think that when we look at important items, right, when we apply a red flag to it, or we look at something and say, oh, this is coming up, we're automatically comparing it to the lesser items. When I try to if we're sort of trying to justify why we should be anxious about an important item, this is not at all doubting the importance, right? If we try to justify, one of the things that I think we naturally do is we look at everything else that's less important and further away. So if I'm trying to justify why I should be anxious about something that is due in 1 week, right? I'm going to say, well, it's obviously it's due before that other thing, And just because it's due first, I'm going to be a little bit anxious. I'm going to be stressed out about it. Same way, if I see this is more important than this smaller thing, it's immediately going to justify my red flag. But that's actually kind of an error, because I think the most important thing to do here is count the items that are more important and due sooner to you. This will really give you that insight, because it's true. The very simplest way, right? Maybe taking out the trash is more important than dusting my blinds. Because yes, it's due sooner, the trash truck is coming soon, and the trash is full, right? And I'm justifying why I have to do that. But if I'm not thinking about everything that's more important, like, I don't know, getting all of my, doing laundry if I need it, or something else like that, if I'm not seeing that, yeah, the trash is important, right? But, there's actually my range just caught on fire. If I'm not actually thinking, that's a little bit extreme, but it's actually really great to see what's more important. So if you're trying to justify the importance or the timely nature of something, don't focus on what's less. Focus on what's more, and that'll really help give you that perspective. So I think that that's something just to remember, because of course I think that we naturally do the exact opposite. Now, of course, the bonus reason is that maybe you're not doing any of this, but those in charge are actually making one or all of these mistakes. And on one hand, yes, that's inconvenient, because you can't just immediately tell your superiors what to do. But at the same time, I think that sometimes if you realize this and you can have a meaningful conversation based on informed criteria, it's actually a little bit easier than trying to change your internal sort of way of thinking about something. Because let's be honest, sometimes if we're stuck on a certain way of doing something or a certain mindset, it's harder to change ourselves internally than even to have a discussion with someone in charge who's willing to sort of pivot a little bit, because we are always going to be more ingrained in our ways when it comes to our own situation than anyone is going to be regarding anything regarding us. I hope that makes sense, but I think it's really important to understand that sometimes we see other people, superiors, as the biggest enemy, right? Or not that, I shouldn't say the enemy, but the biggest challenge in changing. Sometimes we are the hardest people to change. Not because we don't agree with ourselves, of course, but just because it's hard to internalize something that has been so concretely ingrained in our way of thinking. So I actually have a couple questions. I would call this a flow chart of sorts, broken into a couple different slides. So first of all, does it move a metric? So we're not even talking about our metrics yet. Does it move a metric? The answer is yes, or the answer is no. I think that it's important to realize that there's no sort of, right? Because if it sort of moves a metric, it can probably be improved to actually move the metric, etc. So if it does move a metric, now you ask yourself, is it my metric? And the answer is either no or yes again. So I'm going to actually show you a new template that I've created for people who maybe feel like they have way too many important items on their plate, and a couple tips that we have. So for now, I'm just going to say, if it does move a metric but is not your metric, we're going to move it to quadrant 3. And as we're going to see later, quadrant 3 is where you're going to hope to sort of reassign it to someone whose metric it actually moves. Because, right, we want to create a culture where everyone is actively involved in moving their needle. If everyone is moving everyone else's needle, that actually just creates chaos, lack of drive, and lack of proper information. So if you are managers, I encourage you, of course, to see this as an opportunity to create a culture that will actually become more dynamic as we go further into the future. What if this does move your metric? Is it due today? So this is going to help you choose whether it goes in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2. Now, if it's due today, and what we mean by that is if it's going to be done, it needs to be done today. Then it goes in quadrant 1. It is truly important, right? Because we've already decided that it does move a metric, so it is important. And even if you don't keep up to strict formal metrics, of course, we all have those interior metrics, even if it's just our own goals and wishes. Remember, the most important metric in your life is your own happiness, of course. So if it is due today, it'll go in quadrant 1. If it's not due today, it'll go in quadrant 2, and that's where we put the planned tasks. So if you feel overburdened with important tasks, stay focused on quadrant 1, because you're going to be able to stay on top of things, and you're going to be able to stay proactive. If you stay focused on quadrant 1, don't think too much about what's not due today, because it is your job to complete what must be done today, etc. Now, what if it doesn't move a metric? Now, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. And it might seem like, well, of course it's going to move a metric, but I can't tell you how many times I talk to people who overburden themselves with things that actually don't even move a metric. It's just sort of this emotional, like, idea, like, this would be great to do. I do this myself, I give talks on why this is bad, but I still find myself saying, I get in this sort of ideal best case scenario, like, what would feel great as a customer success specialist? It would be wonderful and just be perfect doing this. And then I actually look at what our goals are, customer success, first of all, etc. And I realize that it doesn't actually move a metric. So I have to remind myself to move it off my plate. Of course, this gets complicated, right? If we're talking about items that were actually created by those in charge. So now we actually have to consider the origin of the item. So let's look at it 2 ways. There's you, there's people lower than you, and there's people higher than you. And in the concept of the hierarchy of a business, of a team, it's generally taken for granted that everybody a little bit higher will have a little bit more information. So if it doesn't move a metric, and it came from you, meaning you created that item as a task, you created that task, you were the first one that said this should be done, or someone below you said this should be done, and you're looking at this, you should feel comfortable making that decision, because you probably have all the information needed to say this does not move a metric. We're actually going to table this. You could, of course, throw it out. If you don't like the idea of throwing it out, put it in your inbox, etc. Your priority matrix inbox, I mean. But really, I think that you should have that confidence and that sense that you can make that choice, right? If it doesn't move a metric, and if it's not been assigned by someone higher than you that might have information that you don't have, you can say, this is not important, we're going to get rid of this. Now, of course, if it's assigned by someone, your boss, the person directly above you or higher, that's where it gets more complicated, right? Because it could actually move a metric, but you might not have the right the right information to see how it relates. So we're going to actually send this to quadrant 4 then. In this new template, quadrant 4 is the discussion quadrant. This is the quadrant where we need information to be able to know where to prioritize it. As always, quadrants 1, 2, 3 are already prioritized. Quadrant 4 are the resources, the support for other, a greater increase in prioritization, post-prioritization, etc. So in the same way, it's a slight change, but in the same way, it's supposed to support greater productivity, greater clarity, and greater prioritization. So this item will then go into quadrant 4. And now I actually want to show you exactly what I mean by this. So this is sort of a schematic of a template that I've created, and I will actually jump into Priority Matrix and show you that in a few minutes. But here are our 4 quadrants as always. And then quadrant 1, right? Quadrant 1 has everything that's due today and everything that is absolutely qualified as important. And I'm going to be getting into what happens when you still have too many important items in quadrant 1. Quadrant 2 is for items that are not due today. Items that really, really, they are important, they cannot be forgotten, but they're not due today. And again, I'm going to be talking about ways that you can really sort of get that peace of mind that they will be done when they need to be done. Quadrant 3, see what you can do to pass items to the right people. And by this, I don't mean, don't worry, you're not going to become that person who's constantly just redelegating items, that kind of, like regifting, redelegating. You're the person who's constantly just passing the tasks around. No, the idea is that you can send this to the right person. And, the best work cultures, the best team cultures understand that everybody wants to be in charge of the metric that they have. So again, if you're the manager, I encourage you to create that culture of metric-based activity, and really staying faithful to your metric. And if you aren't necessarily the manager, you can of course ask thoughtful questions that can maybe encourage. You can ask, okay, so I see that that is more connected to my metric. Why am I not assigned that? And this is not connected to my metric. Do we want to swap these tasks? Because of course you're going to be able to work more productively and close out items more quickly if they're your metric, because chances are you have the information that you need, and you also have the drive that you need to work as productively as possible. So that helps create a culture of sharing, but also a culture of unique accountability and responsibility, as well as a more dynamic team. Now finally, quadrant 4, like I said, is the quadrant where you hold those conversations. And of course, in Priority Matrix, and I can talk about that, in Priority Matrix, you can hold those conversations in the system. But even if this is a face-to-face conversation, the questions that I asked you before, the questions that we talked about, things to ask yourself to help you prioritize among really important items, they can actually inform you here. You can always say, hi, if again, we're talking about something that doesn't appear to move a metric, but it is assigned by someone who might have more information than you can say, hi, I was wondering, based on, in relation to the metrics that we discussed for me this quarter, I'm not quite sure how this relates. Could I have a little bit more information on that? If they give you that information, then you'll of course be much better off, because then you can understand where to prioritize it, quadrant 1 or quadrant 2, whether it needs to be done instantaneously, by the end of the day, by the end of this month. If it doesn't move a metric, managers love to see proactive team members, right? So basically, you're being proactive and you're asking questions that need to be asked, right? So maybe they think about it and they say, you're right, it really doesn't. I don't know why I assigned that. Because everyone, from the top to the bottom, sometimes makes these sort of idealistic, emotional decisions in terms of creating tasks. So you can give them an opportunity to rethink that. Now, finally, if it is important, but it doesn't relate to your metrics, maybe they'll recognize that and maybe they'll actually take it off your plate. So I think that the important thing is that, having these well-informed discussions based on the criteria and the questions that I discussed earlier, they will actually, be able to benefit you to have those important discussions. And as I think that, our 3 founders have mentioned several times to me over the course of even this week, and it's definitely part of our core philosophy, Priority Matrix is never going to be able to prioritize for you. In a sense, it's never going to tell you exactly what is most important, right? The thing about Priority Matrix is it tells you what are the conversations that you need to have, what are the questions that you need to ask. The most interesting thing is when people disagree about priorities. That misalignment is the key to so much loss of energy, loss of resources in teams. So if you can hold those conversations based on very clear misalignment and actually realign yourselves, it's one of the greatest things that you can do for the health and the energy of your team. Now, I'm going to quickly just show the template that I created in Priority Matrix, and then I have a couple more slides that just go over details, but I do want to just give you the benefit of the template that I have already created so I can show you. So of course, here is Priority Matrix, and the names that I've created, I think really do sort of indicate and resonate with some of these thoughts and some of these practices that I've already created. So quadrant 1, of course, moves your metric, needs to be done now. It's qualified as important, meaning you've asked yourselves the important questions, you've compared and you've contrasted, and they're qualified. It is still important. Qualified do now is quadrant 1. Qualified do when? And I like to put that question in because I think and I'm going to go over this again, it's really important to add a due date. If it doesn't need to be done now, and if you can't hold that very small chunk of time in your brain, it needs a due date. So it is qualified, it is important, and it is due when. You need to answer that question every single time. By adding a due date, you can also add a reminder. Now, if it's not your metric, not my metric, quadrant 3, you can always rename that. But this is just the basic of what this is. These are all the items that you have and you realize because you have the information that it does not relate to your metric. So you might have to ask someone, hey, this is Joe's metric, right? Joe, do you want to take this over? And can I take over that responsibility that you have that relates to your metric? I've already discussed this, so I'm not going to reiterate too often about this. But again, this is where you put stuff that is not your metric. And everyone can see that, obviously, because this is not your metric, maybe if you have an extra 2 hours, which is probably very unlikely, maybe you will do it. Most important are 1 and 2, and they will be able to respect that. And of course, quadrant 4, discuss. For example, meeting with Joe. Maybe this relates to a metric. Maybe it doesn't. Ask your boss. It is never wrong to ask your boss about this sort of thing. So this is the stuff that you did not create, people below you did not create, so you cannot immediately say, you know what, we're not going to have that meeting with Joe. However, it is important to ask those questions because maybe someone else needs to work on that meeting with Joe. Maybe that meeting with Joe isn't as important as it was before, etc. And anyway, if you're confused, you need answers, you need information, and this is a great segue to getting that information. Now, of course, like I said, if we have due dates, etc., you can always filter and sort based on timeline. So you can go up here, and that can be super helpful. But I'm actually going to jump back to our slide, and I am going to talk a little bit about that. So here, right, we have quadrant 1, and in a perfect world, you would all be able to completely prioritize now and say, oh, you know, I have only 2 important items today. No worries, you know, I can just take an extra lunch, but that's not realistic, right? You still probably have too many qualified important tasks due today because that's life, right? So what do? I encourage you to prioritize in each quadrant because, again, for being honest, there's still more than you should have. So actually what I would suggest is a weighted method. It's actually based on a QFD weighting. It's an engineering principle that actually our team uses. So as you know, in each item in priority matrix, you can add an icon on the right. So we actually use the numbers 9, 3, and 1 to prioritize in each quadrant. And the criteria here is 9 is the most important, and it deserves your energy most, and it's 3 times as important as a level 3 item. Again, level 3 is 1/3 as important. It's 3 times as important as level 1. Then level 1 is 1/3 as important as level 3. Now, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. They actually only pull your critical attention from the question of your focus and the importance level, and then you have to start making tough choices like, is it a 5 or a 6? And your job at the moment is not to decide whether it's a 5 or a 6. Your job is to actually understand whether it's high, medium, or low importance. So I encourage you to use this weighting system, and it's you know, I think it can be really helpful because then you can actually look into quadrant 1, right? Or even quadrant 2, and you can quickly look and you can quickly find those 9s. Make sure that the 9s are done first, etc. So basically this can really help you prioritize, in addition, of course, to due dates. Now, due dates. Why do due dates equal less stress? So this is kind of funny because when I think of due dates, theoretically, it's like, oh my gosh, I have all these due dates. What do? I'm falling behind. I can't do this, right? But the thing about due dates in priority matrix specifically is this: once you add a due date, it's actually impossible to forget about it. I know it's counterintuitive, but I want to explain that. So if you add a due date, like I showed in quadrant 2, it won't fall through the cracks, right? It's no longer this sort of static item. It's an item that is slowly drawing closer. So I think there's sometimes that idea like, well, if I don't do it now, I'll forget it. I won't do it. Well, if you add a due date, you won't forget it. You'll do it when it needs to be done. So you won't be making these stress-filled decisions like, I need to do it now even though it's not my highest priority because I will forget it and that would be bad. You know that you don't have to make those sort of tough choices at the moment. Secondly, you'll get notifications. And as a little PS, turn on your notifications. You can turn on your desktop notifications. And if you have your phone app, of course, turn on those notifications. That way you will get those notifications. So there's no way that you will not be aware when this item actually needs to be done. And you can also, like I said, you can set reminders. Finally, you can apply helpful filters Like you can see what's due today, what's due in this hour, etc. And then of course the Gantt chart and the calendar views are sensitive to due dates. So I really encourage you to sort of experiment with using those more time sensitive views if you are struggling with too many important things. That'll help you sort of plan your time minute by minute. And so, of course, adding these due dates will give you actually the benefit of using that because, again, those different views are sensitive to due dates, so they don't really show very much data without them. Now, finally, I want to end with just 3 things to remember, right? And then we'll actually have our Q&A. First of all, I just want to remind you, proactivity is never wrong, right? So if you feel like you're looking at this and you're seeing so many important tasks, yes, again, like I said, that is life. But at the same time, you can do something about it. You can ask questions, like my second reminder. You can sort of brainstorm and really figure out how you're going to tackle this, right? Because the most important thing is your happiness. And the truth is I can't change the fact maybe that you're being assigned too many tasks, too many responsibilities, too many important things, right? But I do want to encourage you that you do have power over that situation, and even if you have too much, right, you can very clearly analyze what absolutely is a non-negotiable, and what maybe could, even if it's technically important, if you don't get around to it, you'll be able to justify yourself, right? So if you walk into a meeting and they say, you know what, I assigned you these 10 important things, you only did 8. Well, if you can clearly say, I analyzed based on QFD and timelines and level in relation to my metrics, and these 8 needed to be done first, I think it'll be very hard to fault you. So again, you can be proactive about finding that power within that situation, no matter how tough it is. And of course, next thing I would say as just a final note, if you're kind of feeling like you have too many important items, make sure to prioritize your metrics, right? Have that conversation with your boss and say, okay, I have all these metrics, right? What are the most important things? And then maybe that conversation will lead to some realization in management that maybe you have too many metrics that you're responsible for at the moment, right? Because that's another entirely different thing. There's a limit to the number of metrics that we can move at once. And I think that, of course, encourages critical thinking, and being proactive about that allows your superiors to understand exactly what's fair and what's not. So that can be a final thing. If you have too many metrics, ask them to prioritize the metrics for you and work off of that, and it'll maybe help them look again and say, you know what, I thought this was a great metric, but maybe that was hasty of me. Just worry about these 2 metrics at the moment. Secondly, it's okay to ask your manager, of course, and we all know this intellectually, but sometimes it just feels wrong. Again, you're being proactive, and you're actually that person that is encouraging that thoughtful and dynamic culture that your manager is trying to build or actively building at the moment. So you are part of the solution, and you are part of that dynamic culture that every manager wants if you are actually asking questions in a thoughtful way. And of course, if you have the questions that I mentioned before, then it'll actually give you thoughtful questions to ask and thoughtful answers to provide if you need them. And then finally, of course, prioritization is not a rocket science. I don't want you to feel that just because you see too many things as important, you simply don't understand how to prioritize, right? I've given you a couple tips, and I really hope that does help. You can follow those steps, and I actually will have the PDF of this slide deck for you if you do want to sort of look at it later on as you're trying to follow those and ask yourself those questions. But if you feel like, again, it's not a rocket science, but sometimes you just sort of want a little bit of a guiding hand. So please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. We're here for you, and I hope this has helped, but we're always ready and eager to help more. Finally, final priority matrix tips. Remember to close out completed items. I am a culprit here as well. I remind people to do this every day when I'm on the phone with them, and I still struggle with that. Sometimes we're so focused on completing items, we forget to actually visually complete them. Secondly, if you haven't done so, download the phone app, because then, of course, you can have that matrix in your pocket whenever you want. And then of course you'll get one extra notification when it comes to your timelines. And third, I just want to remind you to take a deep breath. I understand maybe how stressful your job is, and life is life, like I said, and sometimes life is not fair, right? But basically what I would say here is you can do this, of course, and we're here for you. And again, remember that you can always be proactive, you can always ask questions, and it never hurts to challenge, challenge the responsibilities that you have, right? Compare, contrast, pick it apart, put it back together. You'll finally have that clarity that you need. So if you have 2 important items, if you have 100 important items, it never hurts to have extra clarity about the relative degrees of importance. Thank you so much. Now we're going to have our Q&A. If you have any questions, I would love to answer them at the moment. Other than that, I just want to, I understand if you have to run off, but do know that you can email me at bella@appfluence.com, BELLA at appfluence.com. So please, don't hesitate. It looks like we have one question. Okay, so it's actually a question of other webinars about prioritization. So actually, I did a webinar about the importance of prioritization a couple of weeks ago, and it is actually on our recording page on our on appfluence.com, and I'm also actually going to put it up on our YouTube page. So if you feel like this was sort of more of a high-level look at prioritization, you just want to go back to the basics, I do want to let you know that we did do that webinar. So look out for that. It's called The Importance of Prioritization. And as I am talking about that, actually, we also recently did a webinar with a guest host, Eric Bloom, the author of a Productivity-Driven Success, and that is also on our YouTube page. And he has another interesting method that I think is really cool as well. It's based on your level of energy, addressing tasks based on what productivity zone you are in. So I encourage you to check that out on YouTube as well. All right, it looks like we don't have any more questions at the moment, so I'm going to end there. But of course, you can always reach out to me afterwards. And again, thank you so much for attending, and have a great rest of your day.